The 13th Amendment of the United States Constitution legitimized slavery with its exception clause, which states that slavery is legal for anyone convicted of a crime. The prison population far exceeds the number of people that were held in slavery. When you look at the number of people on parole, probation, who have other legal obligations to the various states, the impact of the exception clause becomes clear. Here to talk about the 13th Amendment and the organizational push to change it in California are Jeronimo, Aguilar, and John Cannon of Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. All of us or none, welcome to Rattling the Bars.
Thank you so much, man. It's an honor, and really appreciate the opportunity for us to come back on here and talk some truth.
Okay, we'll start with you, John. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization.
My name is John Cannon. I'm here at Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, and I'm an all of us or none organizer. I am formerly incarcerated. I did 10 years in the system, started when I was 16 years old. I was certified as an adult, sent to an adult prison, and when I got out, I was given the opportunity to join the policy fellowship, the Elder Freeman Policy Fellowship at Legal Services for Prisoners with Children. And now I'm the outreach coordinator and the organizer for All of Us or None.
Okay, that's good work. Jeronimo?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So similar to John, I joined the policy fellowship going on 3 years ago now. I was fortunate enough to dodge the plantation per se, but definitely spent substantial time in county jail, and definitely seen the ills of mass incarceration throughout my family. Generations of us have been incarcerated and stuck in the system, and so I joined the fellowship, and it's been hitting the ground running since. I work as a policy analyst now for Legal Services for Prisoners with Children, and we've been around for a long time. The organization just celebrated its 45th anniversary. And then All of Us or None, we've been around for 20 years now. So a lot of legacy.
Okay.
Sir.
Right. And as you identify, y'all been around 45 odd years?
Sir.
Okay, and let's start with this here. Let's frame this conversation by getting people to understand what the 13th Amendment is, and more importantly, broaden the conversation about when we talk about the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, how it's interconnected with all aspects of anybody that's in the criminal injustice system. You want to go first, John?
So the 13th Amendment basically is in the Constitution, and it basically gives the right for slavery to still exist, but it exists under, I would say, like sneaky ways. So they say basically, once you're convicted of a crime, then you're basically legally able to be a slave or involuntary servitude. So that's the 13th Amendment, and a lot of states actually replicated the 13th Amendment and put it into their own constitutions under different laws. And here in California, it's under section
Article
1, section 6. Yeah.
Okay. And Jeronimo, go ahead, flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah. So like John mentioned, man, it's different in every state. So in some states, it's not there at all. And so that's not to say they're not practicing slavery in those states. They just defer to the federal constitution.
Right.
But some states took the extra step in codifying it in their own constitution. And so California is one of those states that codified it through Article 1, Section 6. And it's a little different in California, being that it says that slavery is prohibited, involuntary servitude is prohibited except for punishment for a crime. So it gives the opposition a little more, I would say, a little more insulation to say, oh, well, there's no exception to slavery. The exception is to involuntary servitude. So
Right.
One of the campaign slogans and narratives that we've been pushing in California is that involuntary servitude is slavery. It's
Yeah.
just another word for it.
And in terms of like once we look at this, the 13th Amendment, as you say, each state adopted it in their own form and manner. But what we notice is that we call it the exception clause, being the exception that I can do this, I cannot do this except if this exists. And this that exists is that a person has been duly or allegedly duly convicted of a crime. So now, in terms of the population, the prison population that's subjected to the exception clause, how do y'all see the California landscape in terms of the prison population? What's the overall prison population in California, if y'all have any knowledge of that?
Yeah, so it's at about 100,000 right now, the
Right.
population. But as far as the extraction of labor and exploitation, it's like every other state. They have all kinds of different jobs in there, different industries. You got what's called CalPIA, that's the Prison Industry Authority. So they contract out with, corporations and the like, and they come in and they pay pennies on the dollar, man, to get labor that otherwise they'd have to pay at least minimum wage for. One of the things I want to mention, Matt, is that we've been really intentional about kind of making sure folks understand that the constitutional amendment doesn't automatically achieve wages for folks. And we have a wage campaign, actually. So we're running them. We learned this as we ran ACA 3 a couple of years ago. We lost in the Senate out here. And the opposition was saying, it's going to cost too much money to do this. We agree that slavery is wrong and we need to change the Constitution, but it'll cost the state, $1.5 billion is the fiscal analysis that they gave us. Since then, we've been able to really, because it's a false argument, because
right.
Changing the Constitution doesn't automatically mean that you get wages. And so what we did is we introduced a wage legislation at the same time to say, look, if you want to talk about wages, that's fine. We can argue how much folks should get paid and all of those things. It's a good dialogue to have. But that's attached to our other bill, AB 1516, which is our wage campaign. When it comes to the issue of involuntary servitude and slavery, it's really about consent. We're trying to introduce this idea that incarcerated workers, incarcerated people deserve the right to consent to labor, and should have the right to withdraw their consent at any time. It's not a part of their punishment or their sentence. It's not the 1800s where they say you're sentenced to 20 years and 20 years of hard labor.
Labor, yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's what it is in practice.
And John, you say that you did 8 years, but you went in as a juvenile, right? And they waived on you, made you an adult. What tell our audience, because our audience have a tendency to think that, if you did the crime, then you should do the time. But tell our audience exactly what type of work you did while you was in prison, and what type of skills you came out with that help you later, if any, to adjust in society.
Right. So I did 10 years altogether. And when I first went in, I was 16. And it's like the first thing they do, is they get you, you come from the county jail, you get to prison, they strip you naked in front of everybody. And it's like remnants
on the auction block.
The auction block. It's like remnants of slavery. They put you. The next thing they do is assign you a job. And me being 16, I didn't really, at that time, I didn't really have family support, or I was like homeless when I was younger. So I didn't have any money. When they assigned the job, I actually was, excited that I was going to be able to get some commissary or something. And then come to find out, you only get 8 cents an hour. But the thing is, they assign you to any job. You don't pick the job. They assign you. I did yard labor. I started out as. Then I worked in the kitchen, long hours in the kitchen. Then I did a porter I did all type of jobs.
Right,
Eventually, I ended up going to a fire camp, and I fought fires in the state of California.
right. And
And
that
those,
right there, and they was talking about that, and when I'm looking at like the landscape, the job landscape, at no time was you allowed minimum wage. At no time was you allowed to buy into the Social Security system where when you get your quarters, so like 10 years, you got enough quarters that when you came out, you probably could have got SSI, Social Security benefits. This is the part of the 13th Amendment that helps to validate the slavery concept. But more importantly, like you said, that when you came in, you didn't have no skills, you didn't have no job, and like all of us that came in, all of us come in. I went in when I was 20. I did 48 years. I was functionally illiterate. I was a drug addict, and when I got in the system, I was basically being rescued from, if I want, like George Jackson said, he's gonna find you body in a unclaimed body in the alley, or you gonna or die in the prison by death of 1,000 cuts. But the fact of the matter is that this is the population that they draw on. It's the same population they drew on when they had the black code laws, when they first put this 13th Amendment in there, when they had black code laws where they would, like, if they found you walking down the street and asked you where you going, say, I'm going home. Say, where you live? I live up 2 blocks down, mile and a half down. So you got to call, you trespassing on somebody's property and lock you up. But Jeronimo, in terms of going forward, like let's unpack the ACA 8. And you mentioned that this is an initiative that y'all been systematically trying to get some traction on this issue. Give us a historical perspective and walk us up to where we at now, if you can.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So we introduced ACA 3 with then Senator Comlager, who's now, I believe, a congresswoman now, over in your side of town there, Mansa, in DC.
Okay.
But at that time, she was a senator here in California, and she introduced ACA 3. And we were able to successfully get it all the way to the last leg of the legislature, which is the Senate floor. So it started, at that time, assembly member. She was an assembly member. So it started in the assembly,
Okay.
and then moved on to the Senate, and it got to the Senate floor. Ironically, man, it was actually in June, when everybody's celebrating Juneteenth.
Right.
So we were really hitting that message hard to let folks know, hey, while you're out there barbecuing and having your cookouts, man, realize that slavery is still happening.
Right.
Still snatching up our people, man.
That's right.
We were really hopeful that we'd be able to pass it in June and have that celebration with our folks, man. But there was like I said, there was a real damning fiscal analysis that was put out by what's called the Appropriations Committee out here, where they look at what's the money breakdown and how it's going to affect the economy of California. And it's the same arguments that I'm sure you could hear back in the 18th century, man. The economic part of it, and that's why we can't end plantation slavery. It's the same arguments being made today, saying, hey, we can't end this prison slavery because of the money, right? And so there was analysis that said it would cost $1.5 billion, and that's what really, I would say that, and a combination of that, and a lot of misinformation that was being put out there. There was a lot of characters, legislators, elected officials that were arguing that it was an ambiguous amendment, that it could have potentially a lot of different what they called unintended consequences. And so they weren't opposing it straight out by saying, oh, we don't agree with this. They were just trying to underhandedly oppose it. So we had a lot of folks that didn't vote no on it, but they just didn't come out and vote. They abstained from voting. So we lost ACA 3, and it was really damaging, man. It was damaging to the movement, but it didn't stop our resolve,
Right.
So we went back to the drawing board. And we came back. We found a very strong champion in Assemblymember Lori Wilson, who's the chair of the Legislative Black Caucus out here in California. And we came back with ACA 8. And I would say too that it's really a blessing in disguise, I'd say, because since ACA 3, we've learned a lot about constitution, about the language. We've been able to see some of these other states that have passed amendments, but they haven't had the effect, that we've wanted, like in Colorado and other states where, the plantation is continuing to flourish, even after the amendment has passed. And so it's really challenged us in California to say, we don't want a symbolic change of the Constitution. We don't want just, we're getting this nasty language out the Constitution and we could go on about our way. If this doesn't have if this doesn't have a material effect on incarcerated people, then we're not going to support it. And so that's really the challenge that we've put out there, that we got to have strong language, we got to have consent, and incarcerated people got to have a new right once we pass this thing. Or else we're not.
All right, in that regard, right, John, because you say you deal with the advocacy aspect. How are y'all mobilizing the prison population in terms of getting their families involved? And because I recognize what you're saying, Jeronimo, that lesson learned, go back when you lose a battle, it's just a battle, it's not the war. So lesson learned, go back, re-strategize on how you want to take an approach and then get a language that's more policy orientated in terms of application, as opposed to some symbolism like, oh yeah, this not in there no more, and hail to the king. But John, talk about, if you can, the what y'all doing in terms of getting the prison population to be involved in mobilizing, or helping y'all mobilize the families to be able to have a voice in this decision, because we know that the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration, it devastates the family.
Right. So when All of Us Are None was started, it started by formerly incarcerated people to give formerly incarcerated people a platform to raise their voice, raise our voices. So we do have a lot of in custody members as well as members outside. So we send a monthly newsletter into our members, and we're interactive with our members about what policies we're pushing, and what needs to be done from the inside and from the outside, and we're involving our members on the inside with their voices. Like a lot of the communications that we're pushing out here are personal stories from our members on the inside, to show people on the outside what slavery actually looks like today, what the effects it has on this person, on their family that are on the outside. A lot of people get incarcerated, and these are the breadwinners of their families, some of these people, and they're going down and they're working 30 years, working, and they're not able to take care of their family, but they're working. It's not like they're begging for a chance or this, that they're working. So they should be able to take care of their family. They should be able to. So we're uplifting a lot of their voices and stories, even as we're going through the legislation, because a lot of senators or assembly persons, they actually don't know how it is to be inside there. They don't see it from that perspective. So being able to lift those voices and just to give people another look and a different insight on the inside is powerful, to be able to include our members on the inside, and also to activate their family members on the outside and mobilize them.
Right, and I can see the effect of that in terms of the information coming out of the institution, like you say, the personal stories. It gives evidence, become more evidence-based argument than a feel-good argument. Become like, I'm in prison for 30. I've been locked up for 40 years. I've been locked up for 38 years. I'm working in the industry, and I'm not afforded the opportunity to get minimum wage, but yet I'm sending the few pennies that I have, I'm sending out to my family in order to try to help my family, and also to try to stop my family from becoming dependent on the system, which is a collateral aspect of the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration. Jeronimo, going forward, where we stand at now with ACA 8?
Yes, sir. So we were able to clear the assembly in this past year, 2023. So the session ended, but we were able to get the bill through the assembly floor. And so now we have to clear the Senate. We got the Senate to clear, which was our big fight last time, so we're really gearing up for that, and getting ready for the Senate battle. But we got to get through the Senate by June of 2024 in order for us to qualify this thing for the November ballot. And we really want to get this on the November ballot because it's an election year, which means that, we'll have more turnout from our people.
Right.
And also we're doing a lot of voter registration, a lot of voter education. We're in the what's called the low voter turnout, or the low propensity voters, which is the barrios and the ghettos and the hoods and the places that are marginalized and really ignored. So we're going into the trenches to make sure that our folks know that this is huge, man. This could be the first time that we have a chance to vote on the issue of slavery, in our lifetime. So
right, and I think the more important the narrative is the impact that this the policy change gonna have, because as we well know that, like, if I'm on parole, if I'm on probation, I'm still under the guise of the 13th Amendment. If I've been duly convicted of a crime, until my obligation to the state no longer exists, I can be subjected to whatever they tell me to do. They could subject me to say, like, one of your conditions of your parole and probation is to go fight fires. One of the conditions of your parole and probation is to go somewhere and do free labor. And it's not like that I have a right to say I'm not going to do that. Or if I owe court costs, one of the conditions of my paying my court costs would be to do some involuntary servitude or some work that I don't have no control or I'm not getting paid for. But in terms of the voter registration, now in the District of Columbia, prisoners have the right to vote. Is this the same in California? Do the prison population have the right to vote in California, John?
No, prisoners don't have the right to vote. Incarcerated folks that are in county jail, prisoners in county jail can vote. And a few years ago, we were actually able to restore the right to vote for people on parole.
Okay.
And but anybody that's incarcerated in the state prison cannot vote.
Okay, but the fact that y'all was able to get them two mechanisms right there, because you got a large prison, you got a large population that's out on parole, what we call paper, and you got a large population that's in them detention centers, made the white whale. So we know you got a lot of people that's locked up in the county jails. How y'all networking with them, John?
So for our people on parole, we're out here doing outreach and just raising awareness and voter education, letting people know how important it is. Because when we did restore that right, it restored it to about 50,000 people on parole. With the county jails, that's another fight that we're having. Although that the right is given to vote, they don't really make it easily accessible to vote in these county jails. So we're fighting now to be able to actually make it accessible for people to vote. So that's another part of the fight right there.
Go ahead, Jeronimo.
Yeah, I would just add real quick, Matt, if I could.
Go ahead.
We're in the process as well. There's a bill called ACA 4. And ACA 4 would actually restore the right, or would give the right to folks in prison, incarcerated in prison, to be able to vote. So we're trying to catch up to y'all in DC with ACA 4. It's been introduced by Assemblymember Isaac Bryan, he's a great champion. And so, yeah, we're very hopeful that we can, champion that soon.
And as we close out, John, what do you want our audience to know about the fight and going forward, and how they can support what's going on with y'all?
Just want everybody to know that this fight is not just about people that are incarcerated. This fight is about everybody. It's for all of humanity. This is a humanitarian issue, and just like back in the slavery days, or right now when slavery was back when it was on plantations, you could think like, damn, how did people sit by and let this happen? Well, even to this day, is slavery going on, and we can't sit by and let it happen. And if you do want to get involved, You could check us out on prisonerswithchildren.org. You could become a member. We have membership. We have chapters in 32 different cities across America. So you go on our website and check us out. All of us are none. And yeah.
Okay, and Jeronimo, you got the last word on this. And as you close out, emphasize the fact of how important it is for people to be aware of this form of slavery as we know it.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So I didn't get a chance to touch on the history of California. So if I could, real quick,
Go ahead.
I just want folks to understand, man, and be educated that California was never a free state. You know, they talk about that. You know, they like to. Folks in California love to talk about the South and, oh, we're not like those Confederate states and all that stuff. But the reality is that indigenous people have been enslaved in California since the Europeans had, came onto this land. And you could look back at the 1850 Act for Government and Protection of Indians. These were statutes and legislation that was put out that were vagrancy laws. You had the Greaser Act. And these are all different laws that were put in place that meant that if you were caught loitering, you were caught, unemployed, you were caught spitting on the sidewalk, just petty stuff like that, you would be criminalized and your labor would be extracted. And so there was vibrant slave markets in LA and all across the state of indigenous people and later our African brothers and sisters. So I just love to make sure folks know that California has a lot of wrongs to right. You know what I mean? As far as the history, we're not any better than any other state, man. We have a very, very illustrious history with slavery, and it's continued to this day. And that's why, we're the 5th largest economy in the world, and the prison industrial complex is a huge part of that. So
yeah.
There was the red codes out here in California that actually predated the black codes. And so our black and brown, connection and struggle is really tied through colonization, man. We've been riding together since back then, so it's important that African and indigenous peoples today, that we lead the struggle to end this, being that in California, we make up 70% of the incarcerated population. So just to close it out, ACA 8, we got, the last leg of this struggle to get through so that we can get this on the ballot. Please, mobilize, get involved, and not just in California, but this is a movement that's going across the whole country. So wherever you're at, wherever you're hearing this, tap in with either an organization like ours, All of Us or None, the End Slavery in California Act. But there's lots of orgs and folks out there that are pushing this even in other states. We created a campaign called ABC, Abolish Bondage Collectively, and started that in California, but now we got ABC National, where we're organizing in Kentucky and Wisconsin, Philadelphia. We're all over the country. So we just implore people, man, get involved. Let's make sure that we end this legacy, and let's make sure that this happens in our lifetime, man, that we don't pass this really ugly and very oppressive stuff down to our children, man, because it's not fair, it's not right. And like John said, this is a human rights issue,
That's right.
It's not an economic issue, it's not a criminal justice issue. This is a human rights issue.
All right, thank you. There you have it. And we like to remind people that we're talking about humanity here. We're not crying me a river about people that been convicted of a crime. We're talking about a country that always go around the world and talk about everybody else's dirty laundry and how they're treating their citizens. But we have right here in the United States of America, where slavery was founded in the form that we know it, we have it right here in America, right this day, where they have established an exception clause in the United States Constitution that allow for them to continue to enslave people under the guise of being duly convicted of a crime. But then when you look at a lot of the crimes that people allegedly have committed and how many people been exonerated and how faulty this criminal injustice system is, it stands the question, why are we continuing down this path? So we implore everyone to support what's going on in California. We implore everyone to educate yourself on what's going on with the 13th Amendment. We implore everyone if you have a family member and the family member is locked up, chances is he or she is doing slave labor for slave wages, and this is not right. This is inhumane, and like John said, this is humanitarian. This is humane. This is not Cry Me a River. Thank y'all for coming on. We ask you to continue to support Rattling the Bars and the Real News, because it's only on Rattling the Bars and the Real News that you won't get this kind of coverage where you have these men coming on explaining how they're taking a concerted effort to change a narrative that this country said was changed with the Emancipation Proclamation. Was it? Thank you very much. Continue to support Rattling the Bars and the Real News.
Thank you so much for watching the Real News Network, where we lift up the voices, stories, and struggles that you care about most. And we need your help to keep doing this work. So please, tap your screen now, subscribe, and donate to the Real News Network. Solidarity forever.